Hello and welcome to Access Asia. Coming up in the show, as the US ramps up its military departure from Afghanistan, handing over Bagram Air Base, Taliban insurgents continue to seize territory across the country. 4 major fashion groups are under investigation here in France, accused of profiting from the forced labour of China's persecuted Uighur minority. And 100 years on from the creation of the Chinese Communist Party, a look at Beijing's renewed determination to stifle dissenting narratives about China's past and future. In recent days, the US Army completed its handover of the sprawling Bagram Air Base to Afghan security forces. The withdrawal is a key landmark in President Joe Biden's promise to bring an end to what he's called the US's forever war, and comes as an emboldened Taliban continues to gain ground. Shirley Sitbon has the story.
Another ghost town in Penjwai. This district is the 5th in the Kandahar province to fall into Taliban hands within weeks. Frightened residents have fled their homes. Locals know what to expect with the Taliban's return. Penjwai used to be one of their strongholds. The district is strategic, located about 15 kilometers from Kandahar, the capital of Kandahar province. Kandahar is where the Taliban are originally from, but the powerful Islamist group has taken control of many other areas, more than 100 of Afghanistan's 400 districts. The pullout of foreign troops has accelerated that progress on the ground. US and NATO forces evacuated their key base of Bagram. The full withdrawal is due to be completed by late August, ending the longest US war, 20 years, with 2,442 US soldiers and 47,000 civilians killed, and Afghanistan now appearing to fall back to where it was 20 years ago.
French magistrates have begun investigating claims that 4 major fashion groups have benefited from forced labour in their supply chains. The multinational companies, which include Uniqlo and the owner of Zara, are accused of using cotton from China's Xinjiang region, where it's believed at least 1 million Uighur Muslims are being detained and subjected to forced labour. The case is based on allegations by a number of parties, including the human rights and anti-corruption NGO Sherpa. And the group's director, Sandra Cossart, joins me now. Thank you so much for speaking to us on France 24 today. What exactly are these 4 fashion groups accused of?
Well, we are very welcoming the opening of this preliminary investigation into the handling and profiting of crimes against humanity. It indeed demonstrates from these 4 groups the potential involvement in the most serious crime in order to increase their profit margin. Because by choosing to subcontract their production in the Xinjiang area, as you say, company could be benefiting from the crimes against humanity in this region. So the investigation and the judge will allow the court to decide on the possible criminal liability of this company. And for us, it's crucial that this very powerful actor of globalization cannot escape their duty to respect fundamental human rights in order to make profit.
And Beijing does continue to deny that it's persecuting the country's Uyghur community. How hard is it going to be for these magistrates to investigate this case?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's very difficult. And we had a lot of difficulties to be able to get testimony from victims because obviously, as you may understand, they fear for their life and they are only available to speak once they have fled the country. But once they give testimony, they are giving evidence of very traumatic condition of their working condition, mass surveillance, also withholding of passport. It is what is happening in this camp. So it will be up to the prosecutor and then maybe to the investigative judge and then the court to decide whether these economic actors are linked to these atrocities that are happening in this camp.
And last year, a number of major consumer brands said they would stop using cotton from the region, which sparked a backlash in China. How afraid are big companies of alienating their Chinese consumer base?
Well, you're right. I mean, it's very tricky, and they are in a tricky position. But they are usually communicating a lot about their opposition to forced labor and publicizing that in their ethical code of conduct or ethical charter. But in practice, none of them have committed to withdraw from this area or shed light on their supply chain. So now it's time to confront them with their action, and they should not be benefiting from human rights, whatever the cost.
And just how confident are you that this French investigation is going to actually lead to charges?
Well, it will be up to the prosecutor to see, if there are enough evidence, and then to decide to nominate an investigative judge. Once this judge is nominated, or if is nominated, then there will be another inquiry, and then up to the court. So the judicial time is obviously not the time of the victim, but we are pretty confident that now, with a lot of evidence that is coming out also every day in the news of what is happening, things will move forward, hopefully.
Sandra Cossart, Director of Sherpa, thank you very much for speaking to us here on France 24. The lead up to the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party has kept party officials busy, with cinemas ordered to screen propaganda films and questions on party history even added to college entrance exams. It's about drumming up patriotic excitement, of course, but it's also crucially about stifling dissenting voices. Charles Pellegrin reports.
With towering skyscrapers lining the riverbanks, Shanghai could be a shrine to capitalism. The metropolis is China's financial center and one of its economic engines. But it's also where the Chinese Communist Party was born 100 years ago. In this small house, where a dozen young idealists met in secret for their first Congress. Today, it's a museum, and for the ruling party's now 90 million members, one of the many holy sites of the People's Republic of China. People have come from all over the country to visit, often booking tickets several days in advance. The site was renovated and reopened in early June by Shanghai's party secretary Li Qiang. One of the main attractions is the first Chinese translations of Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto. A few blocks away, where security allowed us to conduct interviews, visitors heaped praise on the party that has ruled China for the past 71 years.
They have led us into a new world. For me and for the country, the party has put us on a more prosperous path.
The party represents my mother. Without her, I wouldn't be here. And without the party, I wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't have this wonderful life.
In the lead up to the anniversary, Beijing has been hard at work, pushing the party-approved version of history. Spearheading this effort is the Chinese Academy of History. It was created 2 years ago by Xi Jinping in an effort to counter negative views of the party's past. Movie theaters, for instance, have been ordered to screen and promote at least 2 propaganda movies every week. And new films like 1921 are being added to the canon of Chinese patriotic pictures. The action-packed historical drama tells the story of the foundation of the party. But while boosting the official story, authorities are also censoring other narratives. A new hotline allows citizens to report any instance of historical nihilism, such as online comments that attack the party's ideology and leadership or defame national heroes or martyrs. Historians we reached out to in mainland China and Hong Kong either refused or didn't respond to our requests for an interview. So we turned to Antoine Bondaz, a China researcher based in Paris, to explain this concept of historical nihilism.
The objective for the Chinese political authorities is to impose their talking points. They want to impose their national story as well as their story of the party, whether it's at home or abroad. And so everything that doesn't fit in this narrative, anything that is beyond these talking points, will be considered to be historic revisionism, historic nihilism, and it will be punished as such.
But some are still willing to speak out. Wu Qiang is a political scientist who says he was dismissed from the prestigious Tsinghua University because of his work on Hong Kong's Occupy movement. Over time, he's seen how the party's history has changed according to who is in power. For instance, under the leadership of reformer Deng Xiaoping, the death and chaos of the Cultural Revolution were thoroughly examined and condemned. These criticisms have been erased.
The biggest change in this year's newly issued edition of the CCP's history is that it uses a nihilistic way to tell the story, especially for the part about the Cultural Revolution. It downplays the 10 years of disaster and turmoil brought by the Cultural Revolution in just 2 pages.
This particular revision of history suits Xi Jinping's tenure as leader, one defined by the lifting of term limits and a return to the kind of personality cult experienced during Mao Zedong's reign.
This is the new history of the party that people can learn now, and it's centered around the neo-Maoism of the past 9 years, which is referred to as Xi Jinping's thoughts on governance. This is the main narrative used during the party's 100th anniversary celebrations, and it therefore adds legitimacy to the present regime.
For the party, it would seem the purpose of history isn't to uncover the truth about the past, but to consolidate power in the present.
And finally, while opinion is still very much divided in Japan over the upcoming Tokyo Olympics, there is one sport the Japanese can agree on. Across the country, every week, millions of people of all ages take part in a series of 13 stretches called Radio Taiso, a routine that's broadcast several times a day on public radio and TV. And the nationwide fitness initiative is no new fad. It's been going since the 1920s. Well, that's it for this week's Access Asia. Thank you very much for watching. See you again next week.
Ogoniland in southern Nigeria was once an ecological sanctuary before oil and gas giant Shell turned it into a graveyard. Successive oil spills left the local people and the environment no chance.
What we saw from the village was a flame of fire into the sky. All went into flame.
There is no means I can fish here.
12 years later, Shell still refuses to accept responsibility.
We want Shell to pay for us the damage that they did.
Follow the twists and turns in this bitter dispute between the oil giant and the Nigerian people in Ogoniland Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.